Governors, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to call to order the 2017 annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the World Bank Group and of the International Monetary Fund. I welcome all governors representing all 189 countries. On behalf of all participants, I would like to extend, through the Governor of the United States, our deep appreciation to the people of the United States of America for the warm welcome and the gracious hospitality. It is customary in these meetings to hear first from the Chair, and I shall proceed in the same way. IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde, World Bank Group President Yong Kim, and fellow governors, welcome to the 2017 annual meetings of the World Bank Group and IMF, and to the 71st plenary of the Boards of Governors. Please join me in thanking Madame Lagarde and President Kim for their extraordinary dedication and leadership, and their strong promotion of effective multilateralism at a time when the world most needs it. The global economy continues to recover, with growth remaining on track in both advanced and developing economies. We witnessed pickups in investment, trade, and production. The welcome upturn provides a window of opportunity to tackle key challenges. With a balanced mix of fiscal, monetary, and structural policies, inclusive growth prospects can be raised and jobs created. While global growth continues, we are nevertheless faced with mounting challenges. Natural and man-made disasters, geopolitical tensions, forced displacement, deep political divisions in countries, and the risk of a more rapid and sizable tightening of global financial conditions. Our meeting today is a reminder for all of us that we can only meet the massive needs of large migrant and refugee populations, prepare for the ever-present threat of natural disasters, and deliver on the ambitious goals of the 2030 Development Agenda if we all work diligently and, most importantly, work together. Fellow governors, ladies and gentlemen, I come to you from a region that has been the cradle of many civilizations and that is caught in an unprecedented cycle of conflict and fragility. A region that is paying significant human, economic, and social costs, impacting the lives of millions of people. These challenges cannot be addressed without the effective intervention of multilateral organizations, the likes of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, in groundbreaking partnership with the United Nations to manage the impacts of conflict, support stabilization and peace-building efforts, and finance a post-conflict recovery and reconstruction program. More importantly, we need the World Bank Group and IMF to help address the root causes of conflict and fragility, to prevent the recurrence of future conflicts. As the situation improves for these countries, multilateral development banks, including the World Bank Group, would have a key role in providing extraordinary financial and knowledge support, assessing the damage resulting from conflicts and the reconstruction needs, while also designing strategies for recovery and reconstruction at an early stage. We in Jordan have been setting a model and witnessed firsthand the capabilities of these two institutions. When we were confronted with multiple external shocks, including one of the largest mass-scale influx of refugees and humanitarian crises of our time. Today, Jordan is hosting 2.9 million UN-registered refugees. This is 13% of the world's total, making us the largest host in the world, both in absolute number and relative to our population. With the World Bank Group, IMF, and the multilateralism of the international community, we have redefined the moral challenge of hosting refugees into a global public good, requiring fair burden sharing. We have also established the principle that assistance needs to relate to a country's carrying capacity. We also pioneered a resilience-based approach that bridges the humanitarian development nexus through the framework of the Jordan response plans. Moreover, we turned the challenge of hosting refugees into a paradigm-shifting opportunity for holistic economic development through the adoption of the Jordan Compact. And we have continued our national development reforms at all levels, adopting a roadmap to achieving the SDGs and a cascading approach to development financing. The World Bank Group and IMF supported this unique Jordan model to cope with these external shocks, providing immediate and significant financial support and stepping up the technical assistance. Moreover, Jordan and the World Bank Group created the Global Concessional Financing Facility platform to mobilize international assistance at concessional terms to address the economic and social impacts of the refugee flows and to meet the huge humanitarian and host communities' needs that Jordan and other host countries are facing. We too often see the very idea of multilateralism coming under siege. There is too often the temptation to respond to these challenges with inward-looking policies and with a withdrawal from the global system. We cannot overlook, however, that this global system we have today has permitted and nurtured an enormous increase in prosperity and a reduction in poverty across the developing world. Over the last half-century, many of the challenges we face can only be met by working together. The scale and ingenuity of the solutions we seek require us to reach across borders, from institution to institution, and by having the public sector working in full partnership with the private sector and civil society. Having adopted the 2030 Development Agenda and working in elevated partnerships together and making sure that we significantly shift the focus on gender and youth, the two most transformative cross-cutting pillars, only then can we maximize the benefits of globalization and technology, mitigate any downside, and ensure that the international system works better, and adjust to an increasingly connected global economy without leaving anyone behind. The World Bank Group and the Fund are beacons in this regard, proving time and again that multilateralism works. Several recent examples include the innovative IDA 18 replenishment, including new windows for refugees and the private sector. The World Bank's innovative approach to catastrophe insurance has also proven itself this summer with successful delivery of rapid payments to several countries affected by recent hurricanes. New loan resources of 9.4 billion SDR have been secured as part of the IMF's ongoing effort to raise 11 billion SDR for the fund's concessional lending for low-income countries, including countries at the center of the current refugee crisis. The fund has also expanded its support to countries affected by severe natural disasters. The fund continues to work with partners, including the World Bank, on tackling the challenge laid out in the 2030 Development Agenda, including by supporting countries' efforts for revenue mobilization and through various capacity development activities. This is part of the wider Addis Ababa Finance for Development agenda. Fellow governors, in formulating a vision for the bank in the next decades, a vision which is encapsulated in the forward look. We asked the bank to take on several ambitious new challenges. We asked them to remain relevant to all clients, but we also asked them to pay special attention to situations of fragility and conflict, to the effects of a changing climate, forced displacement, and to new challenges to global health. And of course, we still rely on the bank and the fund to continue to supply their clients with finance and advice needed to support inclusive, job-creating growth that is equitable and sustainable, and that promotes a multilateral system that is open and focused on meeting the needs of all, especially the poorest and most fragile. But as a result of responding to all that, the World Bank and the IFC have reached their limits that their capital can support. Without more resources in the form of a capital increase, the World Bank will be forced to reduce its annual lending considerably. At a time when some of us need it more than ever, and the IFC will fail to create the markets or mobilize the much-needed finance for development. I call on my fellow governors to recommit ourselves to strengthening these invaluable institutions. We should commit to making a final decision on a capital increase for IBRD and IFC when we meet next spring. We should continue strengthening the governance and efficiency and agility of these two institutions, and completing the shareholding review. And we should work towards the completion of the IMF's 15th General Review of Quotas with a new quota formula in 2019 to maintain a strong quota-based and adequately resourced fund at the center of the global financial safety net. Fellow governors, recent global economic developments have shown that conditions evolve rapidly, with new risks emerging continuously. I am confident that Madame Lagarde and President Kim will continue to provide the right global leadership needed in ever-changing global economic conditions, and ensuring responsive and adaptive institutions. We must all up our game to reconcile inclusive economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. We must focus on long-term stewardship, not short-term maximization. Cross-sector convening and not narrow vested interest. This is the transition we must achieve in the 21st century. Thank you. At this time, I would like to call on the President of the World Bank Group, Dr. Kim, to address the governors.
Chairman Fakhoury, Madame Lagarde, governors, my dear friends Jim and Elaine Wilkinson, it's an honor to address you 5 years after I first stood before you in Tokyo. Each year we gather for these annual meetings to address the most critical challenges that affect the lives of billions around the world. And each year we chart the course of our collective efforts to make development work for everyone, to ensure a dignified life for all. This is a critical time for the work of the World Bank Group. The good news is that global growth is robust, 2.7% according to our calculations. The second quarter of last year saw the highest quarterly growth rates since 2010. Trade is picking up, but investment remains weak, and we're concerned that downside risks such as a rise in protectionism, policy uncertainty, or possible financial market turbulence could derail this fragile recovery. That's why now is the time for all countries to take action on the needed reforms to grow their economies and compete in what will surely be a more complex, demanding, and digitized future. We're also meeting again at a time when multiple crises are in full swing or looming. Conflict, pandemics, climate change, and famine are impacting people all over the world, and they're contributing to an historic number of people being forcibly displaced. Countries in nearly every region are turning inward. International and homegrown terrorism affects every corner of the world. It often feels like our increasingly interconnected world is in fact falling apart, and countries and peoples are pulling away from each other. Amidst this turbulence, organizations like the World Bank Group must step forward and help to build new foundations for human solidarity. We're part of the post-1945 world order that was predicated on the notion that what affects one city, one country, one region can have immediate and lasting impacts on us all. These new foundations for human solidarity must move us from the old constructs of donors and recipients into a new development compact between stakeholders. In 2013, we announced our goals to end extreme poverty by 2030 and boost shared prosperity. A year ago, I explained that there would be 3 ways that we're going to get there: by accelerating inclusive, sustainable economic growth, by building resilience to shocks and threats, and by investing more and more effectively in people. For us, this is an especially important time for tackling global poverty, because we have more room to take bold action to grow the economy, protect countries from major overlapping crises, and invest in people. Now, before giving you some example of progress that we're making on all these fronts, I want to thank the dedicated staff of the World Bank Group who tirelessly work to reach our ambitious goals every day. You inspire me every single day. And I'd like to also applaud our clients and shareholders who've made tremendous efforts under adversity to achieve their highest aspirations. Now, the first pillar of our strategy to end poverty and boost shared prosperity is to accelerate inclusive, sustainable economic growth. We know that official development assistance will not be enough to meet the $4 trillion per year needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and meet the world's rising aspirations. Last April, ahead of the spring meetings, I called for a new approach where we maximize finance for development by systematically crowding in private sector investment and making it work for developing countries and poor people. We developed the joint principles of crowding in private sector finance, and the G20 endorsed those principles last summer. This is a great example of close collaboration between management and the board to launch a fundamental shift in our approach to development finance. Maximizing finance for development isn't based on ideology, nor is it a panacea for all development challenges. It's an evidence-based approach where we ask a very straightforward question: how can we maximize the resources that developing countries have to do the things they need to do for their people while minimizing the burden of public debt? Maximizing finance for development means finding win-win solutions where investors get a good return and countries utilize those resources to meet their development goals. We're putting this approach to work with teams from across the World Bank Group, and we've already seen great results. 3 years ago, in Egypt, subsidies for energy reached 6.6% of GDP, more than the government spent on health, education, and social protection combined. When Egypt wanted to reform its energy sector, the World Bank Group designed a comprehensive package. IBRD contributed technical assistance and analytic experts and a $3 billion loan over 3 years for policy reforms. IFC lent $645 million to the private sector. And with $200 million of risk insurance from MIGA, the joint efforts of IFC and MIGA mobilized $2 billion in private investment in Egypt's photovoltaic solar feed-in tariff program. The policy reforms, initial private investment, and risk insurance helped attract 15 banks and 20 different investors for a large photovoltaic solar park project. And many of these investors will contribute to future projects. The effort helped attract more than $15 billion of private investment in Egypt's gas sector. As a result of their efforts to reduce fossil fuel subsidies and other reforms, the Egyptian government has increased fiscal space by around $14 billion a year. This has allowed the government to roll out 2 new cash transfer programs that reach 1.7 million poor Egyptians. Food subsidies for the poorest have increased by 300%, and the government expanded its school lunch program. We've learned many valuable lessons from this effort in Egypt, but most importantly, that we could be more proactive in creating markets and not just simply wait for them to appear on their own. And we've shown that it can work to finance sectors other than infrastructure, such as we did in helping transform the health sector in Turkey. In 2002, the infant mortality rate in Turkey was far higher than other OECD countries, and the life expectancy was years lower. So the government started an ambitious overhaul of the entire health system, which included advice and loans from IBRD. Turkey launched a public-private partnership in 2010. IBRD provided a $134 million loan and technical support. IFC invested $241 million, mobilizing an additional $540 million in private investment. And MIGA provided political risk insurance guarantees. One of the flagship projects was the Elazig Integrated Health Campus, a 400 million euro, 1,000-bed hospital that was financed by the first project bond issuance under the Turkish PPP program. MIGA and EBRD worked with Renaissance Holding, a Turkish construction group, and Meridiam, a French infrastructure investor, to develop an innovative credit enhancement application that enabled the project to be financed in the bond market. They secured a Moody's investment-grade rating 2 notches above Turkish sovereign bonds. These investments were relatively small, but very important parts of a large program that transformed Turkey's health sector, considerably increasing access and improving public health. In 2002, when the program started, less than 2/3 of Turkey's population had health insurance, and just over half had regular access to health care. The health transformation program has led to nearly universal access. 98% of people in Turkey are covered by affordable health insurance. The program has also led to dramatic improvements in health across Turkey. Infant mortality rates were cut in half. Life expectancy increased from 71 to 74 years, and the mortality of children under 5 fell 55%. Now, these are just 2 examples of many that we're now scaling and spreading around the world. There's never been a better time to crowd in private sector investment. Right now, there's more than $10 trillion invested in negative interest rate bonds, $24 trillion in very low-yielding government securities, and $5 trillion in cash, waiting for a better investment with higher returns. Last year at Davos, President Xi Jinping of China said that the global market system is the ocean we all swim in and cannot escape from. He said, any attempt to channel the waters in the ocean back into isolated lakes and creeks is simply not possible. Maximizing finance for development is our best chance to make the global market system work for everyone. We need to embrace the notion that our greatest moral responsibility is to create equality of opportunity. The maximizing finance for development approach gives countries the resources to build bridges, solar parks, and hospitals. And it frees up funds for schools, job training, and social safety nets, and creates win-win solutions that can grow economies and give everyone opportunity for a good education, for a stable job, for a chance to achieve their highest aspirations. The second pillar of our strategy is to build resilience to overlapping shocks and crises. And one of the most critical is climate change. When it comes to climate change, we're running out of time. 2016 was once again the hottest year since record-keeping began. The last 3 years each broke the previous record. Worldwide, more extreme natural disasters force 26 million people into poverty every year. We have to reduce our carbon footprint and help countries adapt to natural disasters like the recent hurricanes in the Caribbean and devastating floods in South Asia. Last year, the World Bank Group loaned $12.8 billion for climate investments, 22% of our portfolio. We're now the largest funder of climate-related investments in the developing world, and we're on track to meet our goal of having 28% of our portfolio deliver climate benefits by 2020. We're also using our convening power to scale up climate action by bringing the public and private sectors together. There's $23 trillion of potential investments just in the Paris commitments of 21 emerging economies, including green buildings, sustainable transport, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. We need climate investments in the trillions, not billions of dollars. Around $90 trillion will be invested in infrastructure over the next 15 years, just to replace aging infrastructure in advanced economies and meet expected growth in emerging economies. Right now, infrastructure tops out at around $3.4 trillion annually, but the need is more like $6 trillion a year. All of this must be climate-smart, low-carbon, resilient infrastructure. With the UN and France, we're co-hosting the Paris Climate Summit on December 12th to connect investors with climate-smart investment opportunities. Along with climate change, we have to do more to help refugees and to help the countries and people who are providing the world with a global public good by hosting these refugees, countries, of course, like Jordan. A year ago, in the midst of the refugee crisis, we established a special fund that has provided $200 million in grants and unlocked more than $1 billion in concessional financing for Jordan and Lebanon. Lebanon, which is hosting more than 1.5 million displaced Syrians, has the highest per capita ratio of refugees in the world. Jordan, as we heard, is hosting the largest number of refugees in the world. In both countries, 81% of Syrian refugees are under age 35, and 70% are poor. The instrument we developed, now known as the Global Concessional Financing Facility, is making a significant impact. In Jordan, the GCFF has helped provide 50,000 formal working permits to Syrian refugees. In Lebanon, this fund is financing roads and employment programs, creating more than 1 million days worth of labor in direct and indirect jobs. It's also getting kids out of the streets and into schools to provide education and to prevent the tragedy of a lost generation. This year, we also took a large step to break the cycle of panic and neglect around pandemics. Too often, we neglect infectious disease outbreaks until they become a global threat. And then we quickly forget about them after the threat is off the headlines. With the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility, for the first time in history, we have actual pandemic insurance, a $450 million policy that will automatically disperse funds to the poorest countries when an epidemic reaches a critical stage. This is the first time that pandemic risk in the low-income countries is being shared with the financial markets. Why can't we do the same thing for famine or other humanitarian crises? I believe we can, and we're working on it right now. The third pillar of our strategy is to invest more and more effectively in people. For most of my adult life, I worked to provide care to people suffering from terrible diseases in some of the poorest parts of the world. And for most of my adult life, my colleagues and I have been advocating for more investments in people. Usually, we meet a moral argument that everyone deserves a chance to reach their highest aspirations. Providing health, education, and social protection is one of the most powerful ways of giving everyone a chance. We always knew that investing in people is the right thing to do. Now, we're learning that economically, it may very well be the smartest thing to do. Over the past year, we've done several different analyses, and we're finding that investments in human beings, especially in their health, education, and social protection, are far more powerfully correlated with economic growth than we ever thought. Some of our economists are working at the World Bank Group, are working with Chris Murray and the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, a group at the University of Washington that works very closely with the Gates Foundation. We asked them to use their powerful analytic tools to look at the relationship between economic growth and improvements in human capital. I'm using the term human capital because I want to make the point to the ministers of finance who are here today. When you invest in human beings, you're putting in place the capital you need to grow your economies. Too often, we still hear from leaders, first we'll grow our economies, then we'll invest in our people. Investing in people is investing in economic growth. Briefly, here's what we found. If you look at the top quartile, the top 25% of countries who have improved their human capital the most over the last 25 years, and you compare them with the bottom 25% of countries that have improved human capital the least, the difference is enormous. We looked at the 25 years between 1991 and 2016. The difference between the top quartile and the bottom quartile was 1.25% of GDP per year over 25 years. Now, we need to do more work and more research, but this suggests that looking backwards, investment in human beings have had a huge impact on economic growth. And looking forward, surely investing in people will become more important in the increasingly digital economy of the future. Some studies estimate that as many as 65% of primary school children today will work in jobs or fields that don't exist today. We know that countries have had to make tough choices on how to spend scarce public funds. But we believe, and the evidence suggests, that the more and more effectively you invest in health, education, and social protection, the better you'll do as an economy. Now, this idea has been around for some time, but with better data, much, much better data, not on inputs, but on outcomes. We have much better data on outcomes, much greater transparency in sharing data, and new, more powerful analytic tools, Bayesian methods that are used by the great search companies. We're now understanding that the relationship between human capital and economic growth could be far more profound than we ever imagined. Soon, we'll publish a document called The Changing Wealth of Nations. And for the first time, we're looking at human capital as part of the overall wealth of nations. It turns out that more than 65% of the wealth of all nations in the world is in the form of human capital. In rich countries, human capital is a much larger proportion of overall wealth, and in low-income countries, it's a much smaller proportion. So that developing countries, low-income countries, have a long way to go. We desperately need these investments now because we're facing several human capital crises. Globally, 155 million children are stunted due to malnutrition and other factors. Their brains are literally as much as 40% smaller than their unstunted peers. 400 million people around the world lack access to essential health services. 100 million people each year fall into poverty from catastrophic health expenditures. Only 1/3 of the world's poor are covered by social safety nets. Unless we act decisively by 2030, 167 million children will still be living in extreme poverty. We have to fundamentally change the world invests in building human capital. Last week, I announced the Human Capital Project, an accelerated effort to help countries invest more and more effectively in their people. The Human Capital Project will involve 3 efforts. We will accelerate innovative and results-based financing for human capital investments. We will continue to dig into the data, linking investments in people to economic growth. We're looking for new patterns and new answers. And we're forming a broad coalition that includes all stakeholders, the other multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, governments, civil society organizations, and the private sector. Eventually, the project will include rankings, one focusing on the stock of human capital and another where we measure the flow, the investments countries are making today to build the human capital of tomorrow. We're trying to create conditions where heads of state and finance ministers cannot resist investing in their people. We're trying to create an environment where investing in people is not only morally the right thing to do, but in fact, it's something they absolutely must do, with great urgency, to drive economic growth. This will be controversial. But I feel that we at the World Bank Group have a moral responsibility to reveal to our shareholders the powerful relationship between investing in people and economic growth. And more importantly, we're ready to help every single country rapidly accelerate the quality and quantity of their investments in people. Now, to accomplish all of these things, to deliver what countries need at the scale you expect of us, we need more resources. Over the years, I think we've proven our exceptional value for money. $19 billion of total paid-in capital for IBRD and IFC since the beginning of this institution, $19 billion since the beginning of the institution, has yielded more than $900 billion of financing. $19 billion, $900 billion of financing. $50 billion that were put into reserves, and $28 billion in transfers to IDA and other programs. With enormous development needs and rising aspirations, demand is overwhelming right now. Since the 2008 financial crisis, IBRD has almost doubled its lending portfolio. IFC grew its loan portfolio threefold and its equity portfolio fivefold over the last 10 years. If we don't enhance our financial capacity, IBRD would have to dramatically shrink its annual lending commitments by a third. IFC would have to cut back its investments in IDA countries and fragile and conflict-affected states, as well as its equity investments, making the ability to create markets in the world's most difficult settings unattainable. We've done a lot of good work with all of you. Many countries have evolved, progressed, and grown their way to new levels of development. We need to recognize that. We hear you. And we need to open a dialogue with all of you so that the resources of the World Bank Group keep getting channeled to where they make the most difference in achieving our twin goals. And with a capital increase, we can fulfill our commitment to having a financially strong World Bank Group that possesses the ability to provide finance at a level that will meet the aspirations of our clients. I feel a tremendous sense of urgency, not just because there are enormous needs in the world. Aspirations are rising, and aspirations linked to opportunity can breed dynamism, as in the country of my birth, the Republic of Korea. It can also lead to inclusive, sustainable economic growth over a long period of time. But if there's no opportunity to achieve one's aspirations, rising frustration may very well lead countries down the path to fragility, conflict, violence, extremism, and eventually migration. We can play a critical role in finding win-win solutions where we maximize financing for development, create opportunities for the owners of capital to make higher returns, and bring great development outcomes to our clients. We can play a critical role using our full range of financial tools to protect countries from overlapping crises like climate change, pandemics, and the influx of refugees. And we can play a critical role by helping countries make more and more effective investments in their people. In 5 years as president of the World Bank Group, despite all the troubles in the world, I've never been more optimistic that we can help people lift themselves out of poverty, that we can build new foundations of human solidarity. But we must act, as the great Martin Luther King said, with the fierce urgency of now, knowing that, as he also said, there is such a thing as being too late. If we commit to these pillars, if we invest the right resources, if we act with the fierce urgency that these times require, I believe that we can be the first generation in history to end poverty on the face of the earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. At this time, I would like to call on the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Madame Lagarde, to address the governors.
Chairman Fakhoury, President Kim, governors, current and former members of the management of both institutions, staff of both institutions, Jim, Hélène, John, Mr. Kato, and family members, I would like, on behalf of the IMF, to warmly welcome all of you to the 2017 annual meeting. I'm pleased to begin this morning with good news. Because after years of mediocre performance, we expect global growth to be stronger this year. You've heard me complain about the low growth, the mediocre growth, this new normal. Well, growth this year is forecast to be at 3.6%, and we expect this positive momentum to continue in 2018 at 3.7%, which compares with the 3.2% of 2016. But more importantly, this upswing is broad-based, involving 75% of the global economy as measured by GDP. And it offers a major opportunity to secure the recovery, to extend it, and to include those who are excluded or at the risk of being excluded. So who is currently excluded? You can do the math yourself. 75%, 25% are bound to be excluded. And that is more than 40 emerging and developing countries, representing about 15% of the world's population, who are currently experiencing declining per capita income. Many of those countries are located in sub-Saharan Africa. But also, the many people who are displaced, who have no home, but also the people who are facing stagnant wages, limited job opportunities, and dislocations caused by technology changes, trade, and the legacy of the crisis. So our task is heightened as well by geopolitical tensions, by political uncertainty in unexpected corners of the world, and also, sadly, by recent devastating natural disasters. It was the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, who once said, "Healing is a matter of time, but it is sometimes also a matter of opportunity." So how can we seize this opportunity to get to the heart of a stronger recovery, trying to turn a promising upswing into lasting prosperity for all citizens in all countries? How would that healing actually benefit all? That is the challenge that we must take on. Now, looking out here, looking upon the world's finance ministers and central bank governors, you and your staff, the officials who, in the midst of even the most trying circumstances, put their head down and get on with the business of keeping economies away from risks and on tracks. You who are finding money for key priorities, you who are declining the unnecessary requests, you who are guarding against the next crisis, I am confident that you can do it and that we can move on this crucial task. So let me contribute 3 priorities and then identify for you how I believe that the IMF can help. Priority number 1, get the economic fundamentals right. Priority number 2, tackle more decisively the issue of excessive inequality. And priority number 3, address the major concerns of our young people to help ensure bright prospects for them and for future generations. This is not very short term, but it needs measures now. So first, the economic fundamentals. In our increasingly interconnected world, countries travel together, but on different paths and at different speeds. Policies need to keep pace. Now, this doesn't mean a one-size-fits-all for any of the categories of countries in which you feel that you belong. It means a tailored mix of monetary, fiscal, and structural policies to consolidate the recovery and raise growth prospects. Managing a smooth normalization of monetary policy is critical. So are fiscal strategies that reduce high debt without hurting growth and confidence. Now, this is a subtle balancing act for each and every one of you. And we can do it. And we can do it together. And we must also guard against the buildup of financial vulnerabilities. In addition, we need reforms that can lift productivity and potential output. Our analysis of structural reforms over economic cycles shows very clearly that labor and product markets, notably, are more easily reformed, and those reforms are more efficient and more potent during economic upswings. Now is the time to do it. We must not miss that opportunity. It holds the promises of more growth, more jobs, more income, and less excluded. Let me turn to that. We should not miss this opportunity to address more decisively, more directly, the issue which has so damaged our peoples and our societies. And I'm talking here about excessive inequalities. Why? Apart from the moral imperative, it hinders growth, it erodes trust, and it fuels political tensions. Despite reductions in poverty and inequality between countries over the past generation, opportunities, income, and wealth inequality within countries has been rising. We have all heard that today the top 1% owns about half of the world's wealth. Now, how can we tackle this issue more head-on? First of all, as Jim was saying, investments in people are key. Health, education, lifelong learning. Second, stronger safety nets are key, including more direct support for people and communities struggling to adapt to disruptions, whether from rapid technological changes or other forces, including trade. Fiscal tools can also help. Our research shows, for example, that some advanced economies could raise their top tax rates without slowing growth, which would provide resources for priority needs or debt reduction. And of course, we need to do more to realize the full potential of just about half the population, the women. As I've said many times before, it is just an economic no-brainer. So please empower the women by eliminating the legal impediments. Our research has demonstrated that most of us have those discrimination or impediments in our legislative system, and eliminate the bias in taxation, and by providing support for greater participation in the labor market. This would be a global game changer. Our research also demonstrates that it would increase growth, reduce inequality, and support diversity. Young girls, as much as young boys, will be a major influence in the world's future. Which brings me to my third priority. What are young people's main concerns? Well, we can ask our children, grandchildren. We can consult surveys. One of those, published recently by the World Economic Forum, actually shows that the two key issues that young people around the world are most concerned about and would like us to tackle are number one, corruption, number 2, climate change. Systemic corruption is divisive. It undermines people's trust in government and reduces growth potential. Bribery alone costs more than $1.5 trillion per year, nearly 2% of global GDP. And then, of course, there is the challenge of money laundering, of the financing of terrorism, a threat to all economies and a key priority for the IMF. In this area, we have provided technical assistance to more than 120 countries, and we are marching on. Our analysis shows that moving from high to low perceived corruption levels can increase public investment efficiency by 50% and raise real per capita income by nearly 1 percentage point. That is why we have committed to step up our effort in the fight against corruption. And we will work with all our members in an even-handed manner. It's a tricky issue, one that was actually identified a few years back by someone present in this room. Thank you, Jim. The second major concern of young people is climate change. And while it affects everybody, the young and future generations clearly have the most at stake. Just as we owe it to them not to pass on a global economy that is plagued by debt, we owe it to them to pass on a planet that is not plagued by CO2 emission. We also know from our research that low-income countries are disproportionately affected. Our estimates suggest that a 1 degree Celsius increase in a country with an average annual temperature of 25 degrees, and you could think of Bangladesh, of Haiti, of Gabon, could reduce per capita GDP by nearly 1.5%. Energy pricing is key because trillions of dollars continue to be spent on subsidies that drive carbon emissions. Now, with energy prices relatively low, which is difficult for some countries, we have the opportunity to reduce and eliminate these subsidies at more reasonable costs from a social point of view. Some of you have done it. It can be done. It must be done. Now, of course, we can only be successful in addressing global challenges if we work together. A country can go it alone, but it will go further, and the impact will be much more significant if it goes together with other countries. That is true for all challenges, that is true for new challenges, ranging from natural disasters to trade restrictions and cybercrime. Or think of our shared responsibility to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that we have agreed, all of us, 2 years ago. We know, you know, from experience that international cooperation can work, from the reconstruction after World War II to the collective effort that we all drove to fight Ebola. The IMF is working in partnership with you so that we can all go far. So how can we do that? You've heard me talk about being more agile, more integrated, more member-focused. Within the IMF, we call it AIM. This is our objective. What progress have we made? Well, since we met last year, we provided support to 16 countries via lending programs for a total of more than $27 billion, including through the Rapid Credit Facility. And we have moved quickly to strengthen our surveillance, including new analysis on fintech and its impact on financial intermediation and monetary policy, including also new analysis on intangible values. We have become more integrated by combining our research and multilateral perspective with country-specific policy advice. But we're not just integrated within ourselves, cutting across departments, removing silos on project-specific initiatives. We are also integrating our knowledge and our expertise with other international institutions, with the United Nations, with the World Bank, with the WTO, with the OECD, on projects like Compact with Africa, on projects like the International Tax Platform, on the research work that we did collectively on the value of trade. And above all, we are focused and will continue to be focused on serving you, our members, in new and better ways. Over the past year, we have conducted 27 country evaluations with topical analysis on issues ranging from gender analysis in Rwanda to climate change resilience in the Seychelles and inclusion and tax reform in the United States. We have also provided more tailored technical assistance and knowledge sharing. We have deployed across the world thousands of missions to better help you raise revenue efficiently, to better help you monitor your public finance, minimizing the cost of it, to better help you manage your debt and set up financial markets. We have held training 30,000 individuals through free online economic courses. On this occasion, let me take this opportunity to thank profoundly the 40 members that have provided funding for our capacity development efforts. So yes, we have made progress, but we are not at a point where we can stand still, where we can be complacent. We need to hear from you what we can do better and how we can serve you better. So going forward, among other things, we will offer technical assistance to increase your fiscal capacity, to analyze the macroeconomic implications of technology, and look at how we can better help low-income countries deal with the burden of conflicts and natural disasters. Going forward, we will do our best to progress towards the 15th quota review and the formula review to better represent you, but we will need your help. Going forward, we will strive to be more diverse and better included. Now, this is an IMF that is open to new ideas, that is open to the young and the old people that will contribute those ideas. Incidentally, I strongly encourage you to visit the Innovation Lab that we just recently opened to encourage those new ideas. So let me conclude. Every day, across the world, as well as here in Washington, I see our talented and diverse staff from all countries. They represent 150 nationalities. They come to work to give their utmost services, not for me, for you, for the members. And they are supported by the most magnificent members of management, my colleagues, David, Tao, Carla, Mitsuhiro. And we can applaud them. And of course, we have the support of our steadfast executive board. Thank you. Why does it work? Why does it work well? Because we trust each other. And that's where I would like to finish. At the heart of our work is actually trust. The trust that you place in us as our members, and the trust that we must have in each other to work collectively, to work together to solve the pressing global challenges that I have just mentioned. Earlier, I expressed, and I reiterate, my confidence in you. And I can assure you that we're working as hard as we can to deliver on your trust. When sometimes you despair, when sometimes you lose hope, when sometimes you lose disenfranchised, I do on occasions, you do too, we need to draw the strength from that trust, from that teamwork, from the fact that together we can make huge progress. Together we can strengthen the multilateral system that has underpinned our world so well for more than 7 decades. We need to protect that. It is precious. It is helpful. It will be here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Lagarde. Let us now turn to the formal business of the institutions. We have before us the reports and recommendations of the Joint Procedures Committee. Report 1 covers the business of the bank, IFC, and IDA. Report 2 covers the business of the fund. Report 3 concerns matters of common interest to all organizations. We also have the report of the Procedures Committee of the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. On the recommendations of the Joint Procedures Committee and the MIGA Procedures Committee, I propose the adoption of these reports and the recommendations contained therein. As there is no objection, the reports and recommendations are adopted. On matters related to the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, I ask Dr. Kim, as Chairman of ICSID's Administrative Council, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to open this 51st annual meeting of the ICSID Administrative Council. ICSID continues to be the world leader in investment arbitration, administering 258 cases involving 88 states in the past year alone. In the upcoming year, ICSID will be preparing proposals for rule amendments. We encourage member states to be actively engaged in this process. The process is a challenging one, but has the potential to break new ground in the evolution of international investment dispute settlement. The two items on the ICSID agenda this year call for the adoption of resolutions by the Council to approve the 2017 ICSID Annual Report and to adopt the administrative budget for fiscal year 2018. The draft resolutions have been distributed to the members. I propose that the draft resolutions on the ICSID 2017 Annual Report and the ICSID administrative budget for fiscal year 2018 be adopted. Without objection, the resolutions are adopted. I hereby adjourn the 2017 annual meeting of ICSID's Administrative Council.
I thank Dr. Kim. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the governors of the World Bank Group and the Fund for the honor to have served as chairman of this joint session. And I thank you for your support and cooperation. Allow me also to express my deep appreciation to Dr. Kim and Madame Lagarde for their leadership of our two institutions. I also appreciate the commitment of the staffs of the Bank Group and the Fund for carrying out our vital work. I would like to thank Ms. Tsikata and Mr. Lin, as well as the staff of the Secretariat of both institutions, for the successful organization of the meetings. I would also like to thank the two vice chairmen, the governors of Malaysia and Slovak Republic. I wish to congratulate the governor for Finland, who has been selected to chair for the coming year. I wish all the governors and the delegates a fruitful and productive meeting period over the next few days and a safe journey home after the completion of our work. I look forward to seeing you next year in Bali. I hereby adjourn this meeting of the 2017 annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the IBRD, IDA, IFC, and MIGA, and IMF.